This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
People need to have a new destination. And you've got to really want to get there. And a lot of times companies, leaders, and individuals don't take the time to imagine what that could be, because what it could be is absolutely amazing.
Steve, what a joy this is to have you here. Steve Donahue, you are a motivational speaker, storyteller, author, adventurist is what I would call you. And you're here at WCTE because you've been a guest as our speaker for this year. And this is the first of our season. So just share with me a little bit about how it's been to be in our community at this point.
Oh, well, it's been amazing because in my travels as a speaker, I typically end up in bigger cities where there's, like a Orlando or even a Nashville where there's a lot of conventions. And I've really enjoyed it because as soon as you come here, you can feel there's a warmth and a sense of community that's almost got an electricity about it. People are friendly and they're interested in who I am and where I'm from, but you can really feel like it's a smaller community that's really got a reason for being. I mean, people love living here.
That's great. That's great to hear. You have written a couple of really interesting books, Shifting Sands, Follow Your Compass, and both of those sort of are crafted out of you traveled across the Sahara Desert, right?
Right, yeah. So when I was a young man, I crossed the Sahara Desert on a whim, and the first book, Shifting Sands, really describes that adventure. But it's also like a self-help, a motivational book about life, about especially times of change. The metaphor being that life, or especially when you're going through change, is like crossing the shifting sands of a desert. And one of the messages in that book is about the way you find yourself moving forward is in the desert, you follow a compass. You can't use a map. There's no road, or there is a road part of the way, but eventually you have to follow your compass. And so that book was mostly about how we get through change in our lives. And then Follow Your Compass, which is the sequel to that, is a little bit more about that one thing that seems to guide each person's life, that sense of destiny. Something calls to you, something directs you, something points you in a certain direction, and that's what I call your compass.
Now, do you find that most people need or want to change?
Most people need to change. Sure. Ask any husband or wife what they think their spouse needs to do. Most people, sure, we could all change and get better in some way. And generally, change is hard. It's one of the most difficult things that we have to face. And yet life is essentially change. When you look in hindsight over your life, you've really probably done nothing but change. It's when it comes too quickly, or when change is something that is, in a sense, thrust upon us. We didn't choose it. It's just the way, you've lost your job, or suddenly you're having health issues. Those kind of changes I think are the more difficult ones. And my idea is if you can learn to be more at ease with change, you're going to be more successful because, if you think especially of the time we're living in right now, it's really nothing but change.
Right.
And we couldn't have predicted it.
Yeah.
And there's no map for what the world, and especially America, is doing now. So it's shifting sands, really.
I should say that we're very fortunate to be taping this show at the home of Walter Derryberry with a live audience. We usually don't have that for this show, and it's really kind of a treat to have you here with us. You're from Canada, right? You're from British Columbia.
That's right.
Victoria, But you're not just a Canadian citizen. You're a dual citizen. You're also from the United States.
I'm an American, and I'm a Canadian. I have two passports. And when I go through the border, I hold them both out, and I let them pick. Which one do you want to look at? And so I was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. And in my early 20s, I moved to Canada because the fellow that I'd crossed the Sahara Desert with was a Canadian. We had become, of course, through something like that, you become very close, and we were the best of friends. And in many ways, that's the reason why I moved to Canada. It's become my home, but I don't think you ever stop being an American. I still vote, I file U.S. tax returns. Although when Canada is playing America in the gold medal hockey game,
right?
I'm rooting for Canada.
I understand that.
Sorry, folks.
Yeah. Although, around here we're big Predators fans, so we'd
Yeah, and on the way here, there were people from Calgary flying to Nashville because they can't get tickets in Calgary. They can't.
Oh, wow.
And if you buy them from a scalper, it was cheaper to fly to Nashville to watch their Calgary Flames.
Is that right? Okay,
it's crazy.
That is crazy.
Well, Canadians for hockey, yeah, it's beyond crazy.
Yeah,
for sure.
So, tell me a little bit about your experience in the Sahara Desert, and how long did it take, and what was it like?
Sure. Well, it took about 6 weeks. We started in Paris, traveled south through Europe, and then crossed the Mediterranean Sea. Then we crossed the Sahara Desert, and just for a sake of comparison, the Sahara Desert is almost exactly the same size as the United States of America. And then we crossed the desert, and we were continuing onward to near the equator to a beach in West Africa. And the whole thing took about 6 weeks, and we were probably in the desert about a month. You could drive across the desert like you could drive across, from Minnesota to Florida. You could do it in a couple of days if nothing happened. But the Sahara Desert, of course, is a very wild environment, and things happen, right? You get stuck. The worst is to get lost, because you can only carry so much water. And if you get lost, and let's say your vehicle breaks down, it didn't happen to us, but what people talk about is, immediately how much water you have. You have 3 days, you have 5 days. If you ration it, you have maybe another day, and the clock is literally ticking on you. And in fact, you can die of dehydration in the Sahara in as little as 12 hours. It's so hot, and it can happen that fast. So that's your great, great, great danger there. There's sandstorms, which make it absolutely impossible to see your hand in front of your face. There's snakes, there's scorpions. There's a lot of danger there. And at the same time, it is beyond doubt the absolutely most beautiful place I've ever been. And recently I've gone back a couple of times. For a while I was actually running tours back to the desert. Because I missed it.
Right.
And it is so absolutely not only beautiful, but for those who feel like when they're out in nature, they feel closer to God, or a spiritual kind of a thing, the Sahara is one of those places that will do that.
What did you learn most from that experience?
As a young man, what I learned is that I was tougher than I thought I was. Because, I was only 20 years old. I really didn't know who I was, right? What I could put up with. And I think most people are that way. I think most people, until they're really pushed, don't realize how much strength they actually have. And I learned that about myself. And I also learned that you have to be able to accept exactly what's happening for you at any moment. Because if you are a control freak and you go to the Sahara Desert, it'll drive you mad. Things happen at a pace way beyond what you can imagine. And people have a different way of doing things, a way that I learned to love, but you cannot impose your way of doing things on the Sahara Desert.
So, were you afraid?
There were several moments that were very, very frightening, for sure. Yes, yeah, there were moments, and it usually had to do, I almost died on 3 separate occasions. And in 2 of them, I knew it was coming. I knew it was slow motion. It was happening. And so, yeah, that was terrifying.
Do you think fear really holds people back in all kinds of things? Obviously, when you're in that situation, you have no choice but to go forward.
Right.
But often you have a choice.
Yeah, so the metaphor about life is, one of the messages, in my book is called Step Away from Your Campfire. And that's connected to a moment where this nomad appears out of nowhere in the middle of the desert and asks us to follow him or commands us. We don't know what it means. It could be an ambush. We have no idea. And of course, we're around our campfire and we feel good. We feel safe. You know how like when you're out out hunting or you're camping out in the woods, a fire at night makes you feel safe, right? Even though it didn't make us safe. And so that idea that you step away from the campfire, we couldn't see anything for a while because our eyes had been blinded. And in our own lives, of course we all have a campfire. You have your routines, your habits, your family, your systems, everyone needs a campfire in their life. But, if you're going to succeed, and especially if you're going to deal with change, you have to actually get away from that because it's going to stop the journey. Because we get halfway across the Sahara with the help of a couple of Europeans, and then they go back. And, my little joke I sometimes say to audiences, well, what kind of story would I have if I'd crossed half the Sahara and then turned around and went back?
Right.
It's just not that exciting. It's not epic.
That would have hurt your motivational speech.
Yeah, it just would have.
I think that would have missed it.
Steve will show us how to halfway succeed in life.
Right.
And so when we have those moments and we get to choose, it's not fun because we don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. We're afraid. I have a theory that we are afraid not so much of failure as we are of embarrassment. That as humans, we're more programmed to fear looking foolish or inept because that's what happens when you try something new, right?
So, in talking about this and talking about change and how it's fearful sometimes to even change, how do people make that first step? And maybe organizations, how do organizations make that first step?
Yeah, well, that's a great question because it's often the first step. That's the hardest. They can't make the first step. And what I say, because I work a lot with business groups who are going through change, and the reason my friend and I crossed the Sahara Desert, as pathetic as it sounds, we simply wanted to spend the winter on a beach. That's it. This was my friend's dream. He's a Canadian. This is like a classic Canadian dream. Spend the whole winter on a beach. And that was, strangely enough, what pulled us forward. And I think when people go through change, they don't have a destination that calls to them. They're just trying to get through it. They're trying to deal with it. But, you've got to, in a sense, understand that there's something on the other side that matters. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, we don't know what that is, right? You begin some kind of change trying often to get away from what wasn't good. Okay, so for example, my wife is a family lawyer, a divorce attorney maybe is what you say here. So she works with couples that, their marriages have ended, but they're not really thinking anything beyond the ending of something like that. People need to have a new destination. And you've got to really want to get there. And a lot of times companies, leaders, and individuals don't take the time to imagine what that could be, because what it could be is absolutely amazing.
Well, it could be totally, totally different too, right?
Well, it often is really different. But people don't understand how beautifully humans are manufactured to adapt, and especially adapt to difficult situations. I think the name is called hedonistic adaptation, and they've studied people who can adapt to the most difficult circumstances, and strangely enough, we can actually adapt to crisis and challenge better than success. They've studied people who have won lotteries, and often it just ruins their lives. So we fear the difficult adaptations, but we're actually capable of doing it. And it happens a lot faster than most people think.
Now, you've written something called Rules of Desert Travel,
Right.
right? So is that applicable here?
Sure. The rules of desert travel are things we had to do to physically cross the Sahara Desert. But they're really lessons about life. So one of them is follow your compass. So what is that thing that guides you through change, no matter what? There's got to be almost like a value that you adhere to, or it could be your destination. We also talk about travel light. So in the desert, if your vehicle's overloaded, you will sink into the sand constantly. I mean, you'll be digging yourself out of the sand all the time. Well, what's travel light? What's the metaphor here? A lot of people carry a lot around with them. A lot of, the term is baggage, really. But it's just, in any situation, if I chat for 5 minutes with someone, I can tell them this is what you have to unload to keep moving, right? So there's these desert rules are about ways we get through change, more quickly, with less stress. And they're a bit counterintuitive because they're not the usual have a goal and a plan to achieve it, because change is something that's in flux, right? And you need to be able to adapt as the sands literally shift, beneath you.
Yeah. It was fascinating to me that you had this really incredible career as a inspirational, motivational speaker. And then you kind of hit this wall and wrote a book that says, "Take my advice, I can't."
No,
You just
was hoping we would.
Did you just stop? I mean, I think that's important. That's important for people to know.
It's the craziest thing in the world. Okay, so I've been a motivational speaker for almost 30 years, and one day I realized I hated my job. That's right, I'm a motivational speaker and I hate my job. Who would have thought one could do that? But, it had become a routine for me. I compared my life to Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. I was giving the same speech to the same kind of audiences, and went on and on and on and on. And, strangely enough, I actually had to put to practice the very things that I had been talking about, because I'd gotten stuck in my own story, much like the people and companies I worked with. And so what I did was quite fascinating. I ended up at the time, I had written my first book, Shifting Sands, and it had, by some bizarre luck, become an absolute mega hit in South Korea. It sold 100,000 copies in a country I knew nothing about. So I decided to go there and find out why. And it became almost a pilgrimage of sort, going back to find, the heart and soul of me that loved giving motivational speeches, and it was life-changing. Yeah, and people can watch it. It's called Take My Advice, I Can't. If you Google it. It's not pretty, but it's kind of funny, actually.
So did you go through you just mentioned a journey. Did you take time off and then go through this travel? Did you?
I actually spent several years, I traveled 72,000 miles, really in search to recapture that love of what I do and a sense of meaning, really, right? And what I found in Korea, see, the problem with giving a motivational speech is you never really know if anyone's been changed by it. They clap and they laugh and maybe they want your autograph. But when I went to Korea, I would have people line up for hours to get their book signed. And they would specifically tell me, sometimes with tears in their eyes, what the book had done for them. And I mean, it was absolutely like drinking from a fire hose of appreciation and gratitude. Completely changed my life. Wow. Yeah.
So I love your website. I mean it. I love the fact that it is very rich. You have your blog on there. You have a couple of videos that you even have a movie, right, that people can download for free. SteveDonahue.com. One of the things I saw in there was about being epic, living epically. What does that mean, though?
Well, what I've been talking about for the last few years is the idea of narrative intelligence, that life is a story, and that humans are really wired for stories. We respond to stories, and that I've discovered that if you think of your life as a story, you can actually have more impact in the world. And I began to study the different story types, and the oldest story type in the world is the epic story. It's 4,000 years old, and this is the hero who goes on a journey and fights a battle, and this story. And I've identified organizations, like industries in the world, that are based on epic stories who are incredibly successful because people want to be part of something. And you can actually imagine yourself as the hero or heroine of your own story. And we now know through brain research that stories create reality. And if you see yourself as the hero or heroine of your own epic story, in a sense, if you are epic, if you be epic, it can change the results that you have. It could change the way you interact with others. And it's a little bit cutting edge right now, but it's called narrative intelligence.
Do you think it's ever too late to change?
It's never too late. I do think it can be a little bit harder as you get older, but in some ways, as one gets older, I'm going to speak for myself, you know which things don't matter anymore, and that simplifies it.
What about organizations or communities? Is it hard for them to make that change, or is it too late? Can you get to a point of no return?
Well, I suppose you can get to the point of no return where things become way too difficult. but I am an optimist, and I think most people stop trying. Most companies, most couples, most communities, they stop trying too soon. You know, because if it really matters, I believe we can do almost anything, and if that means change, then we need to change.
Tell me about your family. Your wife. You met your wife, and you have 7 adult children. Is that right?
Right. So between us, my wife and I have 7 kids. She has 5 kids. I have 2 kids, and they're all adults. We have a couple of grandchildren in there, and they're all over the world. They're in Australia. They're in Rhode Island. They're in Belgrade. They are each and every one doing something really super interesting, and they keep us really busy, keep us honest, and absolutely none of them take my advice.
Her name's Maureen. She's an attorney, as you mentioned.
She is. Her name is Maureen. She's from Ireland originally, and she is absolutely the love of my life, and the one that keeps me honest with myself. So
how did you meet? You have this interesting theory of either hunting or trapping.
Oh, geez, you read that?
Oh, yeah.
That's doing
fascinating. That's a fascinating thought.
Well, the theory of hunting and trapping, it's like hunters go out and look for something, trappers prepare. And I actually met my wife on an internet dating website. And, you know, in the old school, a guy would go out and go maybe to a nightclub or something and go look for a woman. Well, with internet dating, all you do is prepare yourself, your web page, and hope that someone comes to you. And I laid a trap, shall we say. And it was great because I would never have met her out, because as a lawyer, you know, it's just she needs to be, her public profile is very important. So she wasn't going out. The only way to have met this amazing woman was through something like that. And she won't say I trapped her, so.
Okay, she wouldn't agree with that.
No,
not at all, not at all. Well, but there was an interesting theory of that, is that you really have to prepare, and it's not a sinister sort of trap. It's the idea of,
it's a tender trap.
If you're constantly searching, like hunting, you will potentially miss the very thing that's right next to you, right? The very thing that presents itself to you. You can miss it because you're hunting.
You can, and there's that lovely, it's a country and western song, I overlooked an orchid because I was searching for a rose. You know, that's the idea. You have this very clear idea of what you want, whether it's a husband or a wife or a job or something like that. And that narrow focus can blind you to other possibilities. And so one of the things that happens during change is we often tend to open our eyes up a little bit more to see what else could be available. And in life in general, yeah, that narrow focus, as the hunter, can be effective, but I think we also miss a lot of opportunities.
I've often wondered, as a motivational speaker, do your family or friends, do they ever say, like, when you're just in normal conversation and you start telling a story or you get impassioned about something, do they like, okay, time out, we're not an audience, you don't? Do they ever do that to you?
Yeah, they what they love to do is mock me. So if something's not perfect, or I didn't say something upbeat, or I'm not upbeat, or yeah, this is what family and friends are for,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, it drives me crazy.
Yeah. So what's in your future? What are we going to hear from you in the future?
Well, I have a new book coming out called Tell an Epic Story. So it talks about this narrative intelligence. That's coming out really soon. So that's next. The other thing I've started doing is I coach people on how to write a book, how to publish a book, how to get your story out there, because I think there's so many fantastic stories that are not being told. Mm-hmm. And so I'm working on that as well. Retirement is not certainly in the near future. More grandkids, please, kids, if you're listening.
That's a good thing.
I don't want to explain how that happens, but that's would be lovely.
Well, what about kids? I mean, let's talk about that. We've got young viewers that watch, and what inspiration or what advice would you give them?
Well, for young people who are just sort of looking at life unfolding, I think that the idea that you're going to know exactly what you want to do for the rest of your life by the time you're 20 or 25 is crazy. It takes time. you know, you've got to certainly pursue the things that you love and love to do. I mean, what are you good at doing? What do you love to do? And the third thing is, and I think people miss this, where do you have the most impact? Have you paid attention to notice when something important actually happened? You know, where do you have impact as a person? And even if you're 8 or 9 years old, you can start seeing that you have an impact in the world. And that would be my advice. What are you good at? What do you love to do? And how do you make a difference?
And I guess how and where you tell your story, right?
That would do it too.
All right. We hope to keep hearing about your story. Thank you, Steve. Time went just like that. I knew it would.
I knew it would too. Thank you.
I hope you'll come back.
I will.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.